on Kyiv has killed 12 people, prompting United States President Donald Trump to rebuke the Russian leader. Quote, Vladimir, stop. U.S. President writes in social media posts addressing the Russian leader. Tyrone Bowman live. According to the Wall Street Journal, and here is the article, let's talk about it. In a direct response to the biggest and deadliest aerial barrage on Kyiv by Moscow's forces this year, President Donald Trump made a personal appeal to Russian leader Vladimir Putin to stop attacks on Ukraine and agree to a peace deal. Quote, not necessary and very bad timing, end quote. Trump said in a post on his Truth Social platform on Thursday after the attack. Quote, Vladimir, stop! Exclamation point. 5,000 soldiers a week are dying. Let's get the peace deal done. Exclamation point, end quote. The overnight missile and drone attack killed 12 people and injured 90 others in the Ukrainian capital, part of a countrywide assault that involved 215 missiles and explosive drones, according to Ukraine's air forces. Russia said it was targeting, quote, enterprises in Ukraine's aviation, rocket, and space, machine building, and armored vehicle industries, close quote, among other cities. Trump's frustration with both sides of the conflict is building as talks to the war have stalled in recent days. On Wednesday, Trump criticized Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for refusing to accept a peace proposal that includes Washington's legal recognition of Russian sovereignty over the Crimean Peninsula, which Russia has occupied since 2014. The U.S. president pointed out that Ukraine wasn't required to recognize Crimea as Russia. But Trump had largely refrained from speaking out against Putin when asked Thursday, what concessions have been offered by Russia so far? Trump said, quote, stopping the war, stop taking the whole country, end quote. The attack on Kyiv, which sent residents fleeing to shelters at 1 a.m., has turned his attention to Russia's prosecution of the war and toward Putin personally. Some among the president's Republican allies have also become critical of Putin's refusal to accept a ceasefire. In March, the U.S. proposed a 30-day truce that Ukraine agreed to, but Putin declined, saying, quote, root causes, end quote, of the conflict would need to be resolved first. Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022, aiming to overthrow the government in Kyiv and replace it with a puppet administration that would align it with Moscow rather than the West. Trump had pledged to end the war within 24 hours on the campaign trail, but his administration has since targeted his first 100 days in office or the end of April as the deadline. On Thursday, Trump indicated that he was willing to give Russia and Ukraine only so much more time to come to a deal before the U.S. backs out of helping with peace talks. Quote, we are thinking that very strongly, that they both want peace, but they have to get to the table. Quote, end quote. Trump told reporters at the White House in the cabinet room, quote, I have my own deadline and we want it to be fast, end quote. Ukraine wants an unconditional ceasefire before peace talks, but Russia has said it would agree to a longer pause in the fighting only under certain conditions which Ukraine wouldn't accept. Trump, who was meeting Thursday with the Norwegian Prime Minister, said he was putting, quote, a lot of pressure, end quote, on Putin, but stopped short of saying he planned to put additional sanctions on Russia. The U.S. has put forward a proposal that would freeze the front line at its current position, allowing Russia to keep most of the territory it has taken during the conflict. Ukraine would have to give up aspirations to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization known as NATO. The two-page document makes no explicit statement about future U.S. military support for Ukraine in the event that Russia invades again. Officials say, but leaves open the possibility that other European forces could support Kyiv. It doesn't put limits on the size of Ukraine's armed forces, something Russia has wanted. Ukraine has pushed back the proposal on a range of issues. and it isn't clear that Russia would agree to the terms. So far, the Kremlin has said it was determined to continue with peace negotiations and wouldn't comment on the issue of U.S. recognition of Crimea. Trump said Thursday that returning to Crimea to Ukraine would be a very difficult thing to do, quote, close quote. Even as Putin talked about peace and announced a short-lived and poorly observed Easter ceasefire, Russian troops launched a string of offensives across the front line. Earlier this week, the Russian president spoke at a military conference about Russia's expanding arms production, especially in drones, as well as the need to increase defense production for the front line. On Thursday, Zelensky told a news conference in South Africa, where he had traveled to attend a group of 20 meeting, that Ukraine's willingness to have a ceasefire and negotiate with a country that had attacked and occupied its territory was, quote, a big compromise, end quote. Ukraine's Air Force said Russia launched 145 drones early Thursday, all but 7 of which were intercepted, and 70 missiles, of which 48 were knocked down. Zelensky said he would cut short his trip to the G20 as a result of the attack. Quote, the occupiers suffering critical losses at the front and having no strategic gains, or acting like terrorists, striking civilian infrastructure in our cities, killing women and children, end quote, and General Alexander Zursky, head of Ukraine's armed forces. Videos of the overnight attack on the capital shot 2 missiles dropping out of the sky, one after another, with a mushrooming cloud of smoke following. One of the hardest hit places was Kviv's this is a hard one. Was Kviv's Cite neighborhood, where the blast tore through a residential area. I probably messed that up, my bad. Collapsing buildings, blowing out walls and windows, crumpling cars, and smashing through trees. 12 buildings were damaged in the neighborhood, Kviv Mayor Vatilia Kisichenko said. Rescuers who arrived at the site in darkness found one woman buried in the debris with only her head visible. They dug her out by the light of flashlights and sent her for medical treatment. Even as rescuers searched for victims, the air raid alerted continued, at one point forcing them to stop and seek shelter as Russia launched a fresh wave of drones and ballistic missiles across the country. Moscow's mass killings of civilians have intensified in recent weeks, including a strike in Kyiv, that killed 9 children and 11 adults, and one in the Sumy that killed 35 people. Tyrone Bowman, never surrender, never quit.